Good morning. This is Jennifer Coluciello, and this week we are talking about virtue ethics. In order to understand some integral theories related to virtue ethics, we must first understand how virtue is defined. The Ethics Center defines virtue as not necessarily about following the law or rules that are set in place, but about thinking and acting in a way that displays character traits that one would consider virtuous. These traits could include loyalty, courage, selflessness, and wisdom, to name a few. This approach to life and the resultant actions are made up of more than one ethical theory and includes a pluralistic view in that multiple theories may be correct and must be considered and weighed to determine the best course of action. These theories include the standard of right action, moral complexity, and moral understanding. In the textbook, Schaefer-Landau defines the standard of right action and that the correct action to take is whichever action would be taken by a virtuous person. The morality of the action is not defined by the consequences, but instead by the nature of the person making the decision to perform that action. This virtuous person, a moral exemplar, helps give us a guide and a goal to the behavior we want to emulate. In an ideal world, this would be an easy determination to make, but there are times when there are conflicting possible actions. This is where ethical pluralism comes into play. These additional theories will help us to further determine the best possible and most virtuous and moral action when we are presented with conflicting values. One of these theories is moral complexity. Moral complexity itself acknowledges that there is no black and white, simple formula for determining all moral actions. Yes, there are times when the decision is black and white, but more often than not, there are multiple moral options that are intertwined, each with varying degrees of morality. Simply put, some situations are a tangled mess of options. Narvaez states that we must accept and understand that in order to make the correct and most virtuous decision, it may take some time, some good judgment, and sometimes a compromise to arrive at the most moral action to take, and that following through on that action may be a tough road. There may be consequences to those actions. There may be pushback. There may be other ramifications as a result of the fact that not all of society may be willing to take the more moral road. When we consider the possible right actions and consider the complexity of a situation, we must also employ a good moral understanding to that situation. Schaefer-Landau defines moral understanding not simply as an understanding of right and wrong, but a practical application of that difference to each situation. This necessitates not only the basic knowledge of right versus wrong, but also a sense of emotional intelligence and maturity. This is wisdom that sometimes only comes with age, but it is wisdom nonetheless. These additional abilities allow us to assimilate life's complexities and apply what that right action may be to a given scenario. This is not just a basic knowledge, but this is knowledge put into action and applied. Each of these theories helps guide us to the best possible result when we are faced with conflicting virtuous actions. An example to consider is that a virtuous person would say that we should 1. Do no harm to another being, and 2. Protect our children. But what if we must harm another human being in order to protect our children? These are conflicting virtuous choices. If we utilized a single viewpoint, we may be forced to violate one virtue in order to meet another. But does that change the virtue of each choice? In this case, by understanding a virtuous person would consider protecting their children as the highest moral action, this applies the standard of right action. We must also understand that the emotional and physical needs of the child will supersede the adult who's trying to hurt them. This allows us to convey the moral complexity and consider that component. We must also take in mind the emotional component and the moral obligation of a parent to protect my child. Understanding these moral concepts, we are then able to apply them to the actual scenario. This allows me to make the decision that the most moral and virtuous action to take is actually to protect my child by whatever means are necessary. Applying this pluralistic view allows me to weigh these other considerations, including the complexity and right actions, with a full practical moral understanding, thereby arriving at the most virtuous and ethical action to take. Without those three theories, I simply would not be able to arrive at the most virtuous choice. And to be honest, I would not be able to sleep at night knowing and resting in the fact that I made the right decision. So applying all of these not only allows us to arrive at that most virtuous, most moral decision under virtue ethics, but it also allows me to feel comfortable in the fact that I have taken into consideration what I need to in order to arrive at that action. And here are some references: Narvaez, Schaefer-Landau, and the Ethics Center as well.